On more than one occasion, you have probably heard me talk about how interconnected all of our decisions are when it comes to what we make, how we sell it, and what we actually want our lives to look like. It's why I find crowdsourcing answers to business questions in those giant Facebook groups or in an Instagram story or on social media kind of, in general, less than helpful. More often than not, a question like, should I use Etsy or my own website? Well, those questions actually require knowing a lot more about what your own business or side hustle goals are, why you're selling your work, what stage of making or business or life in general you're in, and so much more, to actually get a reasonable answer that can be helpful to a question that initially sounds like a simple, is it option 1 or option 2, Etsy or your website, kind of a thing. Now, side note, this episode is not about Etsy or your own website. I actually talked all about that specific question back on episode 509, if you're curious about that specific one. I was just mentioning that as a quick example of how interconnected decisions are. And sure, that's true for life in general, as you probably know. Wherever you choose to live informs how you might meet and form relationships, which informs what kind of house or apartment you might live in, and where you live might inform maybe even the cuisine you eat mostly, etc., etc., etc. But the interconnectedness of decisions is especially important when it comes to building a successful business. And success by whatever definition we each have of it. And as I've been finding these last few years in particular, and switching from event photography to ceramics, it is even more true, particularly for a ceramics business. And the clearest example of all of this was brought up when I sat down with Isaac Shue to talk about how he and his wife, Karina, managed to be a fully self-employed household in a tiny town in Kansas. What I didn't realize ahead of time was how integral a $20 mug would be to the whole story, and what a perfect example of the interconnectedness of decisions that $20 mug would be. Oh, and real quick, just a heads up, in case of little ones, we do say 2 bad words in the latter half of this chat. One of them starts with an F, so that's around minute 56. Make your parenting or public studio listening decisions accordingly. All right, we're going to get into all of it and the $20 mug, of course, right after a brief word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art. The collection exists as an online source for research and inspiration, featuring photos of objects made by over 1,000 artists. The images are high quality and can be used with no permission required, making them a great source for students and teachers. To find out more, visit www.rosenfieldcollection.com. A special thank you to the Archie Bray Foundation for sponsoring this episode of The Maker's Playbook. The Bray Clay business is your best source for Bray Epoxy, a 2-part moldable epoxy intended for post-firing repairs. Working like clay, it's easy to shape, texture, fill gaps, and recreate missing parts. Bray Epoxy is sold in tan, white, and black base colors, with a 9-color kit that will allow you to perfectly disguise your repair. Order anytime online at archiebrayclay.com. Now, on with the show. Welcome to The Maker's Playbook, the show where we talk all about what it's really like to make a living from the things you make. I'm your host, seasoned entrepreneur of 14 years, Rebecca Ikes Kara. Hey, Isaac. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
It feels long overdue. I think we've talked about it on Instagram for like a year, maybe?
Yeah.
6 months.
Yeah, about
Solid
that.
6 months.
It's been a while.
Well, before I start getting carried away, because I personally have tons of questions, how would you introduce yourself? Who are you? How do you want to introduce yourself?
Right. My name is Isaac Shue. I'm full-time potter alongside with my wife, Karina. We live in South Central Kansas, so currently live about an hour south of Wichita, which means nothing, I'm sure, to the majority of the people who hear this. It is a flyover state, and we live in the middle of that flyover section, so not much to see. But yeah, we're both full-time full-time in the studio, making a living now for 4 years full-time. Used to be a ceramics high school teacher, but we left that behind after COVID and have focused on our practice together since then. So
Was Karina also a ceramics, like a teacher or a ceramics artist before you guys met, or did one of you bring the other one along?
yeah, it's kind of my story. I have my degree from Goshen College up in northern Indiana in the fine arts with I guess you could say, an emphasis in ceramics. And then I went to South America for a year. That's where I met her. She usually almost has her master's in child psychology. And she worked at the daycare that I was placed at there for a year. And that's how we got to know each other. And I went back then. We started dating that first year I was down. So I went back there for another year and worked at the same placement. Then I came home and we got engaged on Skype, visa purposes, and obviously life purposes. We wanted to. We didn't just do it for a visa, but the paperwork's a lot easier as a fiance. But that's a whole nother podcast.
Well, you and I should start that pod. Like we can compare notes.
Yeah, we don't need to go down that road. So, anyways, I was there a total of 3 years, and we came back to the United States in 2013. We each had 2 suitcases of clothing. And when we got back, we lived in my parents' basement, and I had a wheel and I had a kiln. And so in the evenings, I would make pots. She had never really seen it, but she was always an artist at heart, but she wasn't, I guess, you can't say she wasn't allowed to, but an artist in South America is not making a living. So that's why she chose psychology and went that route, which she loves as much as art. But once we got up here, we started doing the weekly, bi-weekly shows that you had to do. And she would tag along and finally saw that this could work a little bit. But in the meantime, while she was here, she volunteered in a first grade classroom because she didn't know English and she couldn't work legally. So she volunteered there and learned English in the first grade classroom alongside the kids until they finally hired her. And then she worked in the ESL department once she got her paperwork in line there, once it came through. And so then she stayed there, I think, for about 3 to 4 years. She learned pretty good within a year. And then she was a full-time para and ESL translator at the school until we had our first kid in 2017. And at that point, she stayed home to raise Javi. And it wasn't like I told her, but I basically was like, if this is going to work, you need to get more involved into the ceramic part of the business. So she started learning about like checking kilns, unloading kilns, so she could send me a text while I was at school. The kiln's at 450 degrees. What do? Let it cool a little bit more, than open it and start unloading. And it actually helped a whole lot. And she finally started digging her toes in. She didn't really want to because it was quote unquote my thing, and she wanted to respect that. But then once she was at home with the kid and could help, we saw that this could be something that happened together, and she really got into it. And her initial love for art, I mean, came through with that. She hadn't done it with clay. She was more like interior design stuff, but she does that now through the work that she does. She's all about hand building, but she uses it in a way of, how can I use the things I create to help people decorate their homes more? So it's not so much mugs and things, but the things she creates go into that decoration scheme, I guess, of the art world.
So Karina got you into making pumpkins.
Oh my gosh. No, but yes. Yeah, that came from a friend who just randomly texted, and she was a real close friend, and said, "Hey, I want a pumpkin. Can you make me a pumpkin?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not making you a pumpkin. Sounds real awful." And I like making mugs and functional stuff. But then I said, you know what? Why not? So I sat down one day and made one, and then I made two. And then I put a picture on Facebook, and I don't know how many pumpkins I made since then, maybe 3,000. But
I was going to say, in a year, how many, like just this year, do you know how many you made for this fall?
This year we did I get like 847, I think, something around there. Yeah, it's the goal is 1,000 each year, but when I hit 700, it's like, this is tough, and I've got things I want to get going. So yeah, we make pumpkins, but it's not what I want to be known as.
Well, this is a wonderful segue right away to some of the questions that we got from our community members, because the underlying theme from Bill, from Jenna, from Aubrey, from Juliet, everybody who had a question, the underlying theme is essentially, how the hell do you do this all? Because the sheer quantity, I mean, you just talked about 800 and some pumpkins, and that's just the fall. Then you guys turn around and you have your holiday sale, like the sheer quantity of work that you're producing. But then at the same time, you have a totally different line of work that people at NCECA will probably recognize, that's really layered, that's really I'm assuming time intensive.
Right, right. Yeah.
Do you sleep? It's question number one.
Yeah. And especially with this year, I mean, you can edit this out. Going back to obviously the brain tumor, but like obviously with this year, like health issues have come to play and life has completely pivoted from what we used to do to how we do it. And you can't go from where we were and life stop and being self-employed. You got to figure it out and you have to pivot how you're still going to keep up that much because you have to live in your means. And when you've set your means and then life happens and it stops, you can't just sell your house and your studio and everything that you have. Like you've still got to keep pushing. So we've learned new ways to make that happen. Yeah, we sleep a lot actually. We have to with the health issues that we've been faced with. But we do have a 1-year old, so we don't sleep. We sleep a lot, but we don't sleep a lot. It goes in spurts. So 8:30, the whole house is in bed. Once the baby sleeps, we all do. And she's finally through the night, which is awesome. But my work time is 5 a.m. Every morning at 5 a.m., I'm waking up while the family is sleeping for another 2 hours. And I come out and I crank as hard as I can for 2 hours. And then it's go in, get the family up, get to school, get breakfast, get going. The days that we do have help with the kid, get them over there, come back and just crank all morning on the wheel. My personal schedule is morning is wheel time. So once noon hits, I'm off the wheel and I'm doing handles and I'm trimming and I'm glazing and doing everything else other than the wheel. But from 5 a.m. to noon is solid wheel work, except for breakfast time. So it's not healthy, but it is definitely a system that we have created that when you're in the studio, you're working. So we try to have a Sunday afternoon meeting between myself and Karina, and we plan out the week. We plan what needs made. Each of our events that we do, we have a list of our dream list of what we would like to achieve so that when we are in the studio, it is straight, get that stuff made, get it done so we can continue to do what else we need to do in the studio because we're not just working towards a show. We're working on orders. We're working on keeping a gallery stocked. And then we're also working on that one event. So we do those 3 events and that's kind of what our life focuses around.
Interesting. So giving everybody a little bit of a timeline, when did you guys open the gallery?
So we moved back from Bolivia in 2013 and we lived in my parents' basement, I think for 2 years. So let's say around 2015, I finally completed everything for education and I got my first job teaching. And so we automatically bought a house. We live in South Central Kansas where like real estate is real, real cheap. So even though I was the only one working and it was a first gig for teaching, we were able to buy a home and it had a studio in the back.
We should edit that out because if word gets out, we're going to mess up the real estate in Kansas.
No, please do. It'd be great. Then we can sell and make money.
And not afford to be able to buy anywhere else in the world.
Good point. Good point. Let's not go that way. I was invited to do a solo exhibition at Heston College where I was a student. It's just an hour and a half north of here. And so I made a whole series of larger work. They wanted things more than mugs. They wanted big vases, but like as big as 24-inch vases, basically, that would fit in the kiln. So we did a whole series of that. And obviously, it's not going to sell quick like mugs. So when that all came home, it was close to the holidays. So I said, you know what we should do is let's just clean this studio out. We're kind of done making. Let's just wash everything down and let's display it and put little flyers around town. We live in a town of 1,500. The nearest Walmart's an hour away. So I said, let's just do this and see what happens. Do a holiday open house and see who shows up. And we can just display this work that we made. And we did. And it was amazing how many people showed up. I think maybe like 40, but that was huge. So we had this little 2-car detached garage from our house that was a studio. And then it was a place where people learned they could come buy stuff. That show was quote unquote successful, you know? And at that point, people would knock on our door and say, hey, we have a wedding. Can we get a bowl? So we'd take them out to the garage, pull everything out of boxes. And it got to be not inconvenient, but it got to be where people were walking through your home unexpectedly to the back shop because it was a fenced in backyard. You couldn't just go through. But we cleaned up half of that and we made in one half and we put shelves and nice stuff so that when they did show up, they were on nice shelving. Not a gallery by any means, but it was a place that we could display it and have it ready with prices. So it wasn't awkward pulling everything out. Like you just unloaded a whole show for somebody to buy a mug. It was ridiculous, but you made your money and you went on. So we were grateful because we were making the money. I later got a job 30 miles from here teaching kindergarten through eighth grade. And I don't know the exact dates, but from there, I got a better job in Wichita teaching ceramics for high school. And we were looking at moving up to Wichita at that point just to be closer because it was 2 hour round trip every single day in the car.
It's a lot.
Then I was teaching there and it came to COVID time and we were all at home and we were at the point where, what's real, what's not, are we going to die? Are we not going to die? We were pretty careful and we didn't really go out. We would mask up. And we got to the point where almost every afternoon we would take our 3-year-old for a drive just to get out of the house. We'd drive through the country and see things. And we drove past our current house, which is on 5 acres outside of town. We were in the middle of town. And it was a house my grandfather built. He was a carpenter and built the majority of our town. And it was kind of the house where all of our stories were at, where you hear it was the blue house. So every family story was at the blue house, at the blue house. Well, the blue house was for sale. So I said, let's just for an afternoon, let's just see if we can get a tour of it just for something to do. So we called the real estate agent and he met us out there the next day and we just toured it just so I could kind of put family stories, I guess, to rest, knowing what it looked like inside because I had never really been there. And we fell in love with it. And we were not trying to because we were trying to leave. We were trying to get out. And houses in Harper don't sell where we live. It's just real estate is not something that flips too much. And so we said, you know what, let's just make an offer, a contingent offer where it's only if our house sells, which doesn't happen. So we were pretty safe. And he says, well, if you're doing that, you have to put a sign in your yard. So we did. And within 3 days, we had a contract. And it was like, this is supposed to happen. And so it happened. And the cool thing about the house that we were going to is it had this 600 square foot garage detached, just like we had away from the house. So we had the studios in the basement and it had this extra garage. So we took the time. This was September 2020, the day after we did our pumpkin patch. I went back to work on Monday and Karina started packing the house and we moved that next week. So we had to redo this entire garage. The previous owner was a hunter, so he would clean his deer and his fish and everything in this place. So we kind of gutted it, redid all the flooring, the walls, painted, windows, trim, everything, lighting.
Bleach.
And yeah, very much so. And we got a gallery worthy, quote unquote gallery. I don't know. I'm not prestigious enough to be a gallery. It's just a word that we chose because we didn't want to be a country store because that felt weird. But we're not like a gallery where people are like, oh, companion gallery or like any of the other big known ones. That's not what our goal is. But I don't want people to go to the country store to get some pots, Like,
yeah, you're not selling honey alongside your mugs.
Yeah. We wanted to be respected as like, it's fine art, but it's not prestigious. So kind of those fake it till you make it kind of deal. We threw a name that we came up with. It took a lot of time to come up with the name Mostasa and threw us a real nice sign out in our front lawn and announced that we have just become a gallery. But also Karina was involved enough that it felt weird to sell under my name, Isaac Shue, and my initials IS art that I chose for like Facebook or Instagram. She didn't need to sell under my name. So we needed an umbrella where her stuff was also included. And that's kind of why we said we need a gallery and then we both sell our works there. And so September 2020, we moved here. In December 2020, we had our first show in our new gallery space for our holidays. But then we did an official opening. The grand opening was in May. It just gave us more time to get more things finished and more appeal in the inside. And we thought this would be our forever space. And within 2 years, we built one that was 4 times the size because it was going crazy. We just didn't have the room. But, and you say that we didn't have the room one day a year, when we had an opening. The rest of the year, it was totally fine. We have a Ring doorbell. We work in the basement. When it would ring, we knew somebody was out there. So we'd come out and help them. And it was totally fine. 600 square feet was enough room for somebody to shop. And it felt good and it was fine. But Christmas got out of control. And so we thought, we need to do something different. So we got a contractor out and got the next building up. And that's where we're currently located. So that's a really long answer for.
No, it's perfect.
Where did the gallery come from?
I would have asked all of the gaps that weren't, You know I like long answers, so I'm all good.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to me because we're kind of at this point also. And what I'm hearing from you is that only one day a year was the space too small, but it was still worth taking a risk to build that much more space. Because we're kind of at this point of like, if we were to have 2 restaurants at one time, we'd hit max capacity so fast. But at the same time, it's not that we have that much revenue coming in to be worth taking the overhead of having a separate space somewhere else outside of our house. So it's kind of that like push come to shove moment. Before we hit record, you and I were talking about the importance of living within your means. And it's like, ooh, we don't really want to take on debt to expand a studio space when there's only a few days a year where you need that much more shelves.
Right.
Or,
Yeah.
you know, it's just one of those like, at what point do you kind of push that envelope a little bit farther, I guess?
Right. Yeah. And debt is a very scary thing, especially as artists. Debt is extremely scary because COVID hits and you don't know what's coming. And if you have that debt hanging over you, it's a very scary place to be in.
Yep. Or even like having the flu the week you're going to do a shop update for Christmas sales. Nothing even like massively significant, but just like, oh, I can't. Just this week, we had the biggest show we've ever done. And so then the plan was to do a website update immediately if we had stuff left over, which we do. But I had massive illness. Nobody wants to hear the description of this. You know, like I wasn't sitting upright. I wasn't taking pictures. I wasn't editing or updating a website. And so now,
Right.
you know, you're looking at doing a shop update 10 days before Christmas instead of 2 weeks before Christmas. And
Right.
what's that going to do to the bottom line? I don't know. We'll find out. I'll report
Yeah.
back.
Exactly. Exactly.
Which is just, I don't have the answer to that. Unless you have enough sales to warrant having help and staff.
Which is also that's another tough thing. I mean, that's another investment on yourself to make sure that you're going to continue doing it. It's scary. You don't know.
Yes. Well, especially for you guys, what I think is interesting also is starting a retail store in such a small area, right? Because I think we've talked about this a lot in the community in terms of not everyone's ideal audience, quote unquote, like not everyone's customer for their body of work is who you necessarily, you know, who's in your neighborhood or who your friends are, or,
Right.
you know, that was a really hard moment for me to realize with photography of like, oh, who I'm going to work with is not who I, you know, hang out with, and learning that. But you guys have kind of somehow found that balance to be able to, the work, the style, and I'm assuming the price point fits within a town of 1,500 people, as opposed to kind of pricing yourself out because it's like, hey, I have to charge this much because it takes this much work. I don't know. I'm making statements instead of questions. I'm just going to let you take it away. Those are a lot of assumptions.
No, yeah, you're fine. So growing up, my dad's first cousin lives about 2.5 hour drive from us out east. And I mean, it's more out in the middle of nowhere than we are. I think the population of their town is literally 20. And the only paycheck, the only money him and his wife have ever gotten is from pottery. And they started by digging with a literal shovel the clay out of the earth. They didn't have electricity in their home. And I mean, talk about the most humble beginnings by choice that they have lived. And when I started doing this, he pulled me aside and he says, I love that you love the clay, but this is a humongous life choice to make. It is not easy. And it is something you love being in the studio right now. Do you love being in the studio 10 hours a day for the rest of your life? And if the answer is no, you need to stop right now. And through that conversation, he told us that they made a living in a town called Elk Falls, Kansas. You can look it up. There's nothing. It is not near anything. And they have made it. And he said the reason they made it is because they never, and this will rub people wrong, and it's not meant for that. It's just where he found and what we have found too. Never outprice the people who live right next to you. And he says, you can make a mug and you can choose to sell that mug for $8. You can choose to sell that mug for 20 or for 100. You're the artist and you set the price point. But when you outprice your next door neighbors from getting a gift for a wedding, you're putting yourself higher than them in their eyes, even though you know the real value of your work. But if you outprice in their eyes who you are, they will not support you. And it stuck with me. And we have a $20 mug and we've had a $20 mug for 10 years. And we just raised it $2 just this year, just for Christmas, because I mean, our supplies have gone up so incredibly much that we held out as long as we physically could, but you have to keep up with when your price of a 5-gallon bucket of glaze goes from $35 to $135. You have to raise your prices. I don't think that, I don't think it scared people off. I think they understand that. But the fact that almost anybody who lives in Harper can come get a $20 mug to give as a gift, I think that really resonates with the people we live by, that we're not trying. We have a $150 mug. If you want to pay that for a mug, I've got it. I make it. But it's not the only option. If you want a piece from us, you can get a piece from us for $20. Shoot, you can get a piece of us. I think for 8 is the cheapest thing we might sell. But yeah, that came from my dad's first cousin, who his mugs literally are still $9. And it's just incredible how they've done that.
How much kind of intention around how you make those mugs do you have to? I'm assuming you have to kind of say, okay, in order to keep this mug at $20, it's getting this kind of glaze treatment. It's getting this kind of, foot, no foot, certain type of handle, like all the things that go into making that possible, right?
Yeah, for sure. Those mugs, our base mug is a straight cylinder. It gets dipped in 1 glaze, maximum 2. It gets basically an extruded handle. I don't use an extruder. I just pull handles. I can pull a long handle that gets about 4 handles out of that. And I just put basically the lugs on a board, and then I just attach them quick. So I think I can throw about between 25 to 30 mugs in an hour, and I can handle those in an hour. They don't get trimmed. They just get the thumb rub at the bottom that rounds off the base. And it's a very, very quick mug. I think after all, we have it about 4 minutes per mug, I would guess. Hands-on time, of course, you've got the dry time, the kiln time, everything. But physical attention to that mug, I think we have between 4 and 5 minutes. And yeah, I can live on $20 for 4 minutes. That's pretty good money.
How's that compare then to the $150 mug with your like decals and...
Yeah, so we call those wall mugs, and the expensive version gets mushrooms on them. And when I started making those, they took about 4 hours a piece. I've got that down. I haven't recently timed what that is. I'm making a batch. I'm currently working on a batch for ClayCon West to take with us out there. So yeah, they're a lot more hands-on, but that's kind of my therapy, anymore. The production line is work. The art line keeps me interested in being creative, my thought process, different ideas. You can throw it into the quote unquote graffiti that goes onto the wall. But yeah, it's just an outlet for me to stay fresh and in my clay practice and learn different techniques, where production is throw, dip, fire, and get it out the door.
Yep. As somebody who thinks of herself as working very efficiently in other realms of my life, learning and watching the decisions Francesco makes around okay, the challenge is to make the curve of this bowl the way that we want it without a foot, because if we add a foot, that adds so much more trim time, so much more, literally every single thing about the design of any given piece is then also thought about in terms of how it works with production. The way he trims the bottom helps glaze faster and helps get like a clean line at the bottom, because he's got a tiny little angle on that trim. And so then I can take a sponge and clean. We're not using any wax to glaze, because then that takes another step. And that trim line, I can take a sponge around the bottom and it makes an angle and it's a clean line, and we can move on with our life.
Yep, for sure.
It's wild. I don't know any other medium, especially when it comes to the functional side of pottery, that like you're thinking through the minutia of detail informs so much, and how we actually can make this viable as a business at the same time.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, every decision you make in each form comes back to haunt you or is a good decision.
I think you just answered Bill's specific question about how you stay motivated with the level and the quantity of work, but I wanted to ask it directly just in case there was anything else with that.
Yeah, so to stay motivated, and it may sound a little bit conceited, but when this is your full-time gig and your family, your kids' eating and education depends on it, my hobby anymore is business. I've got the pottery down. Now I'm learning how to be a business person, and I set personal goals. And when I say personal, I mean for Karina and myself. It's not just me. We are definitely a team. But I set a goal of beating last year overall annually, but also each month. So I compare this December to last December, and I have those charts open on our computer full time, comparing the days, and we have this much more we have to sell before the end of the year for us to grow. And I know it's very not the best way to live, I guess, looking at money and everything, but money is how we survive. And that's kind of what keeps me motivated is to do better and be able to provide the best life for my family that I can. So that's where that drive to keep creating, even if I'm just throwing production mugs, I have that drive and I love throwing. Like I absolutely love throwing. I could throw 100 mugs every single day and not get bored with it, even though it's a cylinder, because I absolutely love the process. And if you don't love that process, it's not going to be something that you can do. I hate glazing. I cannot sit and glaze 100 mugs a day. There's no life in that to me. I know there are people that enjoy that, but man, just throwing on the wheel, I just love. That keeps me motivated. There's 24 more balls I can make. Let's go, you know?
I feel like we should have had this conversation while throwing now.
Yeah. I do a lot of talking while I'm throwing. I call a bunch of buddies up. So
I do think it's interesting, and this is just more my personal observation, and you know way more potters than I do, so I'm curious what you think. But I feel like there's a personality that's just drawn to production also.
hmm
And I don't know if personality is the right word, but like now I don't have the skill set that you and Francesco and many of our friends do in terms of the speed, but I don't mind repetition. I think I get better. And maybe it's the music background. To me, throwing 50 cylinders is like doing scales, and I can
hmm
see how I'm improving or not improving or what I need to change if it's the same form over and over. It seems to me that a lot of people are surprised by how boring the things to get better and to make a living from this and whatnot, like how boring it actually is instead of constantly doing something new or creative. Like that's kind of impossible? Question mark?
Yeah, but I also think, I mean, if you think of a factory job, or let's say you're screwing on the same bolt 8 hours a day, you're on a production line. It is completely different because you can't really necessarily get better at screwing that bolt on, where you can always strive to get a little bit better. And the only way to really get better in pottery, especially on the wheel, is doing and work on doing better. If I'm currently throwing at 25 mugs an hour, I can eventually get to 26. I can eventually get to 35 if I put my head to it and practice and work. And it doesn't matter how good you get, you can always get a little bit better. And if that's your drive and that's what's pushing you, you can really do it. A lot of people don't want to put that drive in. It's hard, it's a lot of work on your body, it hurts. But at the end of the day, if that is what your family is depending on and you don't have any other income from somewhere and you've got kids, that drive is what you really got to do. Because I do not want to go teach school again. That is just my own personal story. It was hard to leave my family behind every day. I didn't get to see my kids much. And now that I'm here, they have not been in daycare. They will stay at their grandparents' house every now and then. But we raise our kids and we raise our studio, and they grew up. We don't force the studio on them. They've grown up in our studio. They love it. And I love being a part of their lives. That's why we chose to be parents, was to be with them. That drive is to not go back to school. I like my kids better than your kids.
I think every teacher listening will probably understand that deeply.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That's amazing. Actually, that reminds me. As you were talking about just the drive and making it all work, I'm curious. You mentioned in the beginning days, you guys were doing the markets, much like the phase we're currently in. Do you feel like doing those markets, were those ones intentionally in the area where you kind of created a name for yourselves that then when you had a physical space and had a retail space, people already knew who you were? Or like when you talk about looking at the data and saying, we got to sell this much more in the next X number of days to hit the year's goals, is that coming from in person and just hoping people walk in the door? Or that's
right.
being online more, or,
So we are extremely careful with finances. We take big risks like building a gallery in your backyard, but we weigh those risks for a long time and understand that it's going to be fine. And one of those was quitting and going full time. We did not quit teaching full time until we consistently had enough money in our bank account to live maybe a year if something would happen. But we also it basically was at a point where going to school was losing us money because we were not making our orders and we were not able to go to the shows we wanted to. And so going that way, it wasn't just this quick thing of, I just graduated college and I want to go viral and I want to make a living doing pottery. It can happen, but it's not the way that we chose. I can only tell our story. I don't know how it's worked for other people. But when we were just a couple without children, we literally, any craft show within about 45 minutes that we would hear of or that we would be invited to, we went to. It didn't matter if we had to wake up at 3 in the morning or if we would get home at midnight the next night, if it was an overnight show. We did it. And literally, there was one, some were good, some were great, a lot of them weren't. But you have to put in the time and the effort to do those. And if it meant I handed out one card to one person that within a year called me and ordered something, it was worth it. But it's getting your face out there, it's putting your product in front of people because people are not coming to your door knocking knowing you're a potter. They only did that after they had our work in their hands, and that happened at small little craft shows. But I mean, it was anywhere from free craft shows. So there was one that was a up and coming film festival that called and asked if we would set up. We'd never heard of them. And we went and they set us up. And I'm not even exaggerating one bit in this. They sat us up inside of a pizza store. So there's pizza restaurants where you go to the back to the bathroom,
Mm-hmm.
and like every now and then there's just a small little weird lobby outside of the bathrooms. That's where they set us up.
No, no.
And I was like, this seems kind of like a weird placement. She goes, yeah, but on it, she goes,
Everyone's going to walk past you, though.
everybody goes to the bathroom. And I'm like, okay, Marge, how many times has your husband said, I'm going to go to the bathroom and comes back with a mug? Never. Like, nobody's going to the bathroom looking to buy a $20 mug. It just doesn't happen. And so we sat there literally for 4 hours. We did not get one sale. We got more weird looks like, what are you guys doing popped up in the bathroom? It was awkward. It was weird. And we tore our booth down and we left before, like maybe 3 or 4 hours before it was over.
Oh, God,
we-
it was like an 8-hour day?
Yeah, it was a full day. Yeah.
Oh, God.
Yeah, we pieced out. It was awful. It was awkward. It was uncomfortable. But the point of the story is we did any little place that we could put our stuff out. It wasn't just this magic thing that, bam, you got popular and you're selling pots. Like we busted ass. Can we say bad words?
Yep, you're fine.
As much as we.
Depends on if you want Javi to listen to it or not.
Yeah. Mom, skip over that minute.
Mm-hmm.
So, we did literally any little show, craft show, Pinterest show. It didn't matter what it was. Our local fair. I mean, our Harper County Fair, they have it's called the Blue Barn, where they set up booths where Norwex is in there. And the local extension office is there if you want to learn how to grow seeds. And boom, there's a pottery booth there. We've been doing it for like 10 years, and it's literally outside of our home shows. I think it's our second best show every year because we're consistently there and people come back and people come home for the county fair and they know they can come see us. My classmates, everybody, they come back and everybody buys a mug and it's turned into something really cool. But it's all gone because we have literally hit every single fair within a 50-mile radius of where we live. And then slowly people started searching us out. I also think pottery is like one of those really weird, unknown things to people, especially in rural America. Nobody knows a potter and nobody's really seen the process. Everybody's used a mug and everybody has a handmade mug that their grandma bought at Goodwill for $0.25 and then passed it down. And so they're like, oh, I do have a mug that's handmade. Yeah, you're right. The majority are molds, like Chinese molds from Target, not
Right.
like Hammerly molds.
Hammerly molds.
Yeah. But that's what everybody knows, and everybody can relate to a mug. When they see that you actually made that mug, it means something to them. So going back to that county fair, I had an order for 100 spoon rests one year, but we had to go up there and sit for 4 days. So I took my wheel up there and I said, I'm up here for 12 hours for 4 days. I just took my wheel and a whole bucket full of balls and I made my spoon rests. But then every time I would make one, I looked up and there was a crowd around because nobody had seen this voodoo magic of a wheel and pottery, And then a kid would walk by and say, can I do that? And I'm like, oh, yeah, sit down. And then we would charge $15 and I would use their hands and I would make a little bowl. Then the next year we came prepared and we brought a sign and we brought glaze colors. And we had a line of little kids making bowls that I would use their hands and I would push, And of course, I made it. Mom and grandma thought it was their kids really making the bowl, but it's a way to market your work and get people involved into what you're doing. When I was a teacher, there was a I'm so ADHD. I go all over. I apologize. My stories
You're
go from one
fine.
to the next. When I was a teacher, there was a social studies teacher that would do Facebook Lives all the time. And I said, what do you like? Why do you do this? And she says, I want parents invested in what I do with their children. Parents don't come to school, but guess what? They're going to click on a Facebook Live. And the only way to get actual people involved and invested in what you're doing is to have them step into your classroom and see what's going on. And I've learned that with pottery too. When you take your wheel out and they see how what is going on behind the scenes, you mean you actually physically made that with your hands in a ball of dirt? Now I know I'm paying $20 for a mug. So it's getting people, a big part of marketing what we do as potters is getting people to see what we do, not just a finished product. Because the process inspires people with money so much more than just a breakable mug that, well, it's going to break if I put it in the dishwasher. Yeah, you're right. But if you take care of it, it's handmade. Like, know the story behind what you're buying, and then people are going to buy it and come back and buy another one.
Yep.
That's squirrels are everywhere. I'm sorry that I jump back and forth, but in the end, I feel like I pull it back together. So,
I was going to say, it makes sense to me. So either I'm running after the same squirrels you are.
yeah, right.
Well, so kind of jumping again, also, because Jenna and Aubrey's question ties into it in terms of you do have these distinct styles and lots of things going on. So I'm going to connect it when we're talking about marketing in terms of, because the way I see it, you're kind of making one body of work that is what I assume is kind of for your local audience and making sure it stays affordable to that community. And then there's the other body of work that's your exploratory, artistic, whatever, art with a capital A, however we want to call it. But what Jenna and Aubrey are both asking is what kind of challenges, positive and negative, between having two different styles that you're selling. Because Aubrey pointed out, have there been people, teachers, mentors, whoever, who have said, like, you need to only focus on one body of work?
I wouldn't say teachers or mentors have said that. I felt that talking with other quote unquote artists, like on Instagram or from comments. I don't really feel that personally. A real good friend of mine owns the manufacturing plant here in town, and he actually lived in Bolivia for 8 years, down where I actually did my time of voluntary service. And he and I took a trip down there one year, a couple years ago, and we went on a 3-day excursion way down to, they're called the Salar de Uyuni. It's a big salt flat, biggest salt flat in the world. And it's done by Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia, right in kind of the boundary. And there's no real cell phone service. There's nothing out there. It's the most beautiful place in the world, but there's no way to communicate with the outside world. So we were in a 4x4 Land Cruiser with a family from Switzerland. Our driver was Bolivian, and then it was me and Tim. And he's the owner of a real big factory here in town. But anyways, they're the number one flatbed in the world, which is a big, like, they pull the bed off of a truck and they put a flat bed on there so you can haul your hay around to the cattle. While we were down there, his business bought, I believe it was the second or third most selling flatbed called Butler Beds. So there's Harper Industry Beds and there's Butler Beds. So Harper bought Butler, and he's been more of a mentor to me business wise. If we have questions about money, where to invest, what to do, we bounce things off of him. But anyway, so they bought the number one, let's say the number 3 brand. And so I made the comment, I said, so are you gonna get rid of the name Butler and make it just Harper and offer the first class line? And then you also have the third class line, which is going to be a lot cheaper. And he says, no, if you want to buy a Cadillac, you're going to buy a Cadillac. And it kind of stuck with me. If you want an Isaac Shue piece, you're going to buy an Isaac Shue piece. And that's what I feel like a lot of the art world kind of goes to. If you want an Isaac Shue piece, you will buy a wall mug because that's the only thing out there. It resonated with me that it made real good sense for what they were doing. But for where we're at, like it doesn't feel like it needs to be that way as an artist. And it always goes back to the economic crisis, let's say, that we all live in, is how do we make money? If I want to stay home with my family and make a living, I'm not going to do it selling $150 mugs. There's not enough people out there buying that much that I live a life that I want to live. But I can find 7 people that are going to buy a $22 mug quicker than I'm going to find one who wants to buy a $150 mug. We're going to find those people out there, and that's fine. And I'm going to sell them a wall mug, and that's great. And I love making them. But I also love making a cylinder, like, so much that I just love making that. So for me, I know there's people who are not going to sit in their studio and just crank cylinders all day and go to art shows and sell $22 mugs. I get it. That's fine. But I also don't want to just sit and make wall mugs all day. Like, I want to throw. And if I have to make 100 mugs a day and find those buyers so I can keep throwing, I'm going to do it. But I don't feel like it defines you being the artist or the production person. I think there's definitely room for people like us to do both, where you can get an expensive one, but you can also get a cheap one. Just this morning, I was sitting over, we have our holiday hours right now. And so we're open more than we normally are. We're open 10 to 5 just on weekdays. And I had some ladies from Oklahoma. We just live, I don't know, 25 miles from Oklahoma, who drove up, and I was making some wall mugs and putting mushrooms on them out in the gallery. Just, I get free time sitting out there. So I'm working on those. And they came over and they had no clue that I made something other than just a blue mug. And they asked what I was doing. I was putting the mushrooms on the side. And then I explained to them, I don't have any here to show them, but I explained the process to them. I explained the decal process, the different graffiti, sgraffito, different things I do, adding the bricks, adding iron oxide, painting on them, the design, where the designs come from, and how they actually have meaning to me as an artist compared to just a mug. And after that conversation, they asked if they could reserve some. When I told them they were $150, the very first part, they, the typical sneer, like, oh my gosh, for a mug, are you kidding me? And after that conversation, they asked if they could both save one. And I think a lot of it is just educating. We have to educate our people. But at the same time, educating doesn't mean they're still going to buy enough to make a living. They're going to appreciate it, and they're not going to raise their brow when they pick it up and see that it's $50 for a mug. Are you kidding me? It's taking the time and the effort to educate people other than other potters. And then I feel you can do both, because they're going to come in and they're going to grab a $22 mug and a $150 mug. Where if I only offer 150, most aren't even going to buy. If I only offer a $20 mug, I'm missing out on a whole nother category of people. But if you have both and you have time to make both, and you can make them look like they kind of go together, you can play in both games. I don't know why you couldn't. I enjoy it. We don't have as much time now to do the wall stuff as I would like. But man, I love having my fingers in 2 different lines of work, 3 different lines of work. I mean, we do production, we do interior design, decorative pots, and we do wall mugs, And I feel like I belong in all 3 lanes. I feel like we can produce a gallery style mug, and I feel we can produce a production line. And if that's not the way to make a living as a ceramic artist, I guess I'm doing it wrong.
But you're paying your mortgage and buying your kid groceries, so I'm
That's
pretty sure
right.
it's working.
We're still overweight, so that means we're eating enough. So
Yeah. I do wonder how much, and I don't have the answer to this. I wonder if it's easier to have more disparate pieces when you're selling in person than online, because the internet, people, attention span, the scrolling, the need for people to recognize your work real quickly, remember who you are with that singular body of work, kind of that whole ethos of recommendation. Because I was definitely taught that even with photography. It was like, it'll be easier to market yourself if you're a specialist in one category rather than being a jack of all trades, right? Like,
right.
everybody would remember me for weddings. And, even though I occasionally would do family photos, nobody thought of me for it. And that was fine because they remembered me for the big thing, right? But if you were when I first started and I was trying to do graphic design and photography and this photography and that photography, it was hard to get people to remember me. But I wonder how much that is a question of like remembering you on the internet versus, because my guess is going to be, I just stopped in the middle of a sentence and had a new idea. My guess is going to be there's a lot of potters who think of you and Isaac Shue and the name with your wall mugs, with the graffiti, with the decals. And this might be the first time they've even heard about your production work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it could be.
Because you do kind of keep them separate online, right?
We do. So like my Facebook community is more production pumpkins. My Instagram community is very much so the art. But just in this past year, I've kind of asked myself, why do you try to separate it and just keep, Facebook is very much a local crowd. Instagram is very much national and international crowd. But at the same time, I said, you know what? Why hide that? So I've been doing a lot more on Instagram with our production and pumpkins and things. I still am very Facebook heavy on that compared to Instagram, but every now and then I'll throw a bone to Instagram of pumpkins and what we do. But if you get on the Facebook page, It's much more active, much more pictures, but also just Instagram. I'm just tired of doing reels. So I kind of just stopped. And also, we just haven't been producing many of the wall mugs. So it's kind of, if I don't mix them, my Instagram's going to be dead. And then I feel like I've worked hard enough to gain, I don't have a monster following, but I've worked hard enough to get what I have. To just stop and focus on Facebook seems weird as well. So I feel like we have been mixing those a little bit more. I don't know where that will go in the future. But yeah, Facebook it's a different animal than Instagram. And the people we reach on both of those is completely different.
Which is super interesting. And I want everybody to take a deep breath when they hear this, because they're going to start thinking like, oh my gosh, I have to be doing both or all the things. And it's like, no, that's
No,
not necessarily what we're saying. Take a breath.
not a bit. And also, like, so there's the famous button, share this on Instagram. No, I want two separate platforms and I want them to be separate because they're not the same. They're not the same people and they're not the same product. It's twice as much work. Yeah, for sure it is. But we have learned how it works for us, and that's not going to work for everybody. And it's Facebook's not the place most people want to be. I mean, it doesn't work for most potters. I don't know why it does for us, to be honest, but it does. And so we're continuing to do it. I think it's because we're in rural America, where our next door neighbor knows us and they follow us, and then they bring a friend and they follow us, and then they bring a friend. Where in the city, it's a lot harder to get your neighbor interested in what you're doing. You don't want your neighbor looking at you. You're like, my garage door is up because I'm leaving, not for you to come over and have a conversation.
The three little boys, four, but one of them can't walk yet, who live across the alley from us, feel very differently. The garage door up is absolutely an invitation
Yeah.
to come on over. And they are very sweet. But I'm like, I'm currently using power tools. Can you please go ask your parents if it's okay if you're here? Like, I need you to not be in the downdraft of the power sander.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
Oh,
can you
yeah.
just... Oh, shoot. I love it. I want to make sure I don't get carried away before I actually... I think Juliet's question was very similar to Bill's in terms of everybody's like the motivation and the question of burnout in terms of 50 to 100 mugs before breakfast and the quantity. But I think we've covered that, how you don't get burned out.
Is that my girl, Juliet Davin?
Yes, it is.
Love her.
She had, I can embarrass you thoroughly and read you the paragraph of lovely, nice things she had to say about you before the question.
Oh, dear God. No, it's totally fine. We have friends in Houston. So when she lived there, we went down to her studio, and she's just like an amazing human. People like that is another human being that you do not see the whole story on her Instagram. When you meet her and you see what she's doing and everything,
Yep.
amazing human. So I can embarrass her, but you don't need to read anything.
Well, I mean, half of that was her explaining that you came through Houston and you guys got together and what a great time it was. So
Yep,
you both
she's
have the
awesome.
same memory.
She was great.
I don't know what I did right in the world to get as lucky as I did with she's one of the first people along with Bill to join the community. And I'm like, I'm doing something right. If these are the people coming in, like
Yeah.
we got a good, awesome group of humans.
Yeah, for sure. They're great.
It's a special place. See, and now just thinking about all of them, I've completely lost my train of thought. Again, I think what I'm hearing kind of come through, at least, or what I'm reading between the lines so much is, and getting to like see you talk that nobody else can, selfishly, the two of you seem to have just picked what is natural to the two of you. Also, you know, you're not trying to do something that, even though there's aspects of business that none of us necessarily like and that you have to do, right? Being on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, it's still very much done in a way that kind of connects with your values and who you guys are and the type of life you want to build, even if that is long studio hours, hard life. That's what I'm hearing. It still all jives to me as compared to, I don't know, somebody who's super interested in like high-end design and interiors when it comes to like New York penthouses. Yeah, you're not going to start making $20 mugs and sell that to the same audience. It doesn't jive. At least from the outside looking in, everything, all the decisions you guys are making, the choices you're making in terms of the body of work that you have, where you live, where you work, the price point, all of it, people have heard me say over and over again, all of this stuff connects. And the reason, from my perspective, it's working for you guys is because you're aware of that and you're making decisions that make sense to keep it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? Is the assumption correct? How's it feel actually being in it?
Yeah, it does. And a lot of that goes to Karina. Like I tell a lot of people that, and I've tried to get her on to do a podcast. I've tried to put her picture on. She hates it. She hates the attention. She is very introvert. And I always feel bad because it's like I get all the praise of you guys are successful. It's like because of her. And she's the quiet one in the background. And I tell people if I was still single, I'd still be in my parents' basement, making in their garage, and I would still have one single table with no layers, no tablecloth, selling pots with masking tape on the bottom that I wrote on a Sharpie, $20. But since that girl came along, it's like, she makes candles and she wraps them in fancy paper and she puts them in a box and she puts a label with an actual, it looks like you bought it like at a Hallmark store. And it has a care instruction card that we get professionally printed, and every detail in the work, every detail in how we check people out and how we wrap a bag, how we put a box, how we ship things. She'll walk out when I'm packing a box to ship and she's like, "What are you doing? You're wrapping that ugly." And I'm like, "How do you wrap a pot ugly? Like, who cares? They're going to open it and open the pot." But literally every little detail that you do makes sense, all the way down to how people enter into your store and how they feel when they're there shopping, whether that's your booth at an art show or whether that is your gallery in your backyard. You get 2 minutes with people. And if they feel good holding your product, if they feel good opening your product, using your product, in the 2 minutes that you get to talk with them, if they leave feeling good, they're going to come back. And that's honestly, if you're at an art show in Wichita, if you are doing a penthouse in New York City, if you can make that person have a good experience, they will come back and shop with you. And that's the one thing that we've noticed. I don't know. I wouldn't say we make good pots compared to other people. I wouldn't say that we are more successful than other people. We have just learned in our community and the people that shop with us how to make them feel loved or good or how to have a good experience, and they come back for it. I got to admit, she makes candles. And then from that, she started making those wax melts. And I was like, "What are you doing? We're potters. Why are you selling something that's not in pottery?" "Well, because people are going to buy them." And she's right. She makes wax melts. She sticks 6 cubes in a bag and they fly off the shelf. And she literally gets a manila envelope bag with a little window in it. And she puts a label on the top, a label on the bottom, a warning label on the back, a little care packet inside, whatever, and sells them for $5. I'm like, "Are you serious? You put $5 into your labels and your packaging?" But we've literally gotten emails from somebody saying, "I come back to your shop because you put care into what you do. I bought a bag of wax melts that you could have easily put into a Ziploc bag and sold it for $5, and it would have been the exact same product. But the amount of time that you guys take to put into making it a good experience," which once again is Karina, it's not me, it's what is bringing people back to our shop. And that's that. It's care about your consumer more than you care about the dollar they're bringing. And that's what we have multiple times told many people: give your product away. Do not be so stingy. Don't be so proud of the work that you produce that you cannot give it away. Because doing that, always giving them the benefit of a doubt, always letting them have the upper hand, whether you're making change and you're out, don't go make change with your neighbor quick and make them stand there and wait for 5 to 7 minutes. Lose $2 and give it to them. You saved them time. They got $2 back. That makes you the good person. And it's just those are the experiences. They may go unnoticed by that person and they may not come back and shop, but I can guarantee you 9 out of 10 do notice and they will come back because of the experience they had with you, not your product.
Or the person in the booth, when you did do that, overhears it and then tips you $2 because they were like, "That was really nice of you." It's that ripple effect I get with everything in life. You have no idea, just that one little drop in the bucket that then it just keeps going. And I feel like with anything in terms of selling our work, it's just like we've just got to put enough drops in the bucket to get it going. And not to mention, it's a lot more enjoyable to treat people nice and then work with really lovely humans. It's just a much more enjoyable life.
Yeah, seriously. No, it's great. And that's when they have a good experience, you do too. When they have a negative experience, you have one, and then it's your business. And then you go home frustrated because
Hmm.
A negative experience happen and that creates the same waves as a nice experience. So if you can give up a little bit to keep it nice, it's just life's so much better.
A couple of years after I started my business, the first time I took on, consistent overhead and had a studio space and whatnot, I shared it with another photographer. And he was a very particular guy, which made him really good at the craft of photography, but also meant that like everything was difficult. Everything was, I don't know, weighted or heavy or whatever the right adjective is. And I noticed being in that same space, that then also meant the people he attracted to work with. It's kind of that like begets like, or whatever the cliche is. The people I knew who were really high maintenance or really particular, or everything was, had to be just so. Well, those were the types of clients they attracted.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'd complain about those kind of clients. And I
Oh,
was
yeah.
like, look in the mirror, bro.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I
You
mean, don't
know?
get me wrong. There are a lot of people we complain about all of the time, but you're happy and you're pleasant, and then they leave, get in their car and they leave. And then you can turn to Green and be like, what the absolute fuck was that? Like, yeah, we complain. Don't get me wrong. We're not this like happy go lucky. Everything's great. We're always nice. Like, but with the clients and like the customer's always right. Yeah, it drives me nuts because they're not always right. But you can't let them know that. They're always right to themselves. You're not going to change their mind. But when they leave, you can sure cuss them out to your spouse and hope they never come back. But
Also, for the record, the quote, everybody forgets there's a second half to that quote. The customer is always right in matters of taste,
yeah, true.
is the full sentence. But everybody, somewhere along the line, we cut off the second half. But it's such an important.
Yeah, it just sounds better.
Oh my gosh. Well, I also just want to pick your brain to the nth degree, because as we said before we hit record, there's not that many examples out there of entire households making this work. And so I feel selfishly just being able to chat with you, being like, okay, we can figure this out. We can figure this out. We're on the right track, but also you just got to keep on keeping on to get to a point where it is actually working.
Yeah, yeah.
That being said, is there something that, we haven't talked about, or, you wish people knew, especially as there's so many new potters coming onto the scene? And, I know that you talk and see so many people at conferences and stuff that you just wish they kind of knew or would help them get started and going when we're all trying to figure out how to make a living from the things we make.
I don't know. Nothing like just sticks out, but it's just the constant. Don't compare yourself to others' success, because there's so much more that you don't see behind that. Like, it's real easy to paint a real good picture online. But at the same time, like, people have defined their own success doing what works for them. It doesn't mean it will work for you. A lot of it is based on the location, where they're at. If you're an online only specific person, a lot of that is based on the luck of an algorithm that hit really good. You've got to find your own path. And it's that way in anything, not just ceramics. Like neurosurgeons, we have experience with them. There are good ones and there are bad ones. Just because you're a neurosurgeon doesn't make you a good neurosurgeon. It's the same thing in pottery. Just because you know a couple people who are successful and you copy what they're doing, it doesn't mean you're going to be a really good potter that's successful. It's real easy to compare. Social media is an unfair game, especially as you're starting. But along those same terms, don't think that someone is successful got lucky. It is extremely hard to be successful. And there's an extreme amount of work that goes behind that. There's many times I'd rather be at a basketball game with my friends, or out riding a bike, or climbing a mountain, or going skiing, or doing whatever. But we sacrifice those things to bust ass and keep going. Especially like right now during the holidays. I don't know a potter that is not worn out at this minute. It's an extreme exhaust. I hate to go back to Kurt Hammerly, but and he's on, anybody brings up a name in ceramics, it's Kurt Hammerly, but I like him. He's a friend of mine. I like hanging out with Kurt, but it's like, I love all the time when he's like putting on these posts of, I am so exhausted, I can barely glaze another cup. But that's where we're all at. And if you're not at that point as a potter right now in this specific time of the year, you're not doing it right, because you've got to bust ass when the money is coming. And it's not going to come in January and February. It's coming November, December, and you have to take advantage of that time. And if you're not, that's on you. Like, it's not an easy gig, and it doesn't come easy. It does eventually when you figure out the world that it works in for you. But until that, you have to bust ass and you can't give up. And you're going to find it. Like, don't give up because it didn't work this year or next year or the next year. We've been doing this solid for 12 or 13 years. Like, it takes time. It takes so much freaking time. That is so true. Now that we have interns that work for us, I tell them over and over,
10,000 hours thing or something.
well, like the master has literally messed up more times than you've even attempted. And not saying that I'm a master and they're not, but it's legit. The people making a living doing this and doing it well have messed up more times than the majority have even tried. And that's going to shows. We've messed up at more shows than you've probably even shown at. And it's just, that's what you have to do. You have to grind. Art is not a form of making money in the world that is known as successful, but even ceramics, even more so than art, it's so unknown to the world. If you're an artist, you're a painter, a drawer, to be a potter and get into the actual world and get people to pay money that they spend time working to make that money and then choose to spend it on a $20 mug, it is not easy, but it's not impossible. You've got to push and keep doing it. And that's where people give up. It's the grind, but you have to grind. And it's better days are coming. There's always a better day than the one you're having right now. If you're in a bad day, like you can't give up making a form, making a glaze, whatever it is, you have to push through and you're going to get there. It doesn't come easy to anybody.
Agreed. I was reminded recently of just how many years I've been going back through, like, with kind of winding down weddings, trying to undo myself from all these systems I'm paying for and whatever that I don't need anymore. And so I'm going back through all these years of contracts and information and just remembering the different events that I've had because of it and realizing I didn't really hit where I wanted to be until 5 years in. And it was just one of those reminders of, like, it's a matter of also kind of making sure you've got the support system to have the runway to get through those 5 years to then keep going, right?
Yeah.
Because if we just pull the plug and go full time immediately from the get-go, the pressure to make it work,
Oh, it's too much.
it's a whole different thing. So you just said you guys have been, making pots for 12 to 13 years, but you've been full-time for 4. So just to reiterate it, that means you were putting in the hours, fast math, like 9 years before you ever even, what people see now online in terms of the pumpkin selling out and the holiday sale and all of this glorious, amazing, quote unquote, success. Well, nobody saw the 9 years before it.
Right. But it was also not 9 years of 15 minutes a week. I was still doing 40 hours in the studio. I mean, Ryan Durbin's a good example. That guy works a full-time job and then he's working a double full-time job in the studio and he's doing great. You're going to work a whole lot is basically what we're trying to get at is even if you're doing a full-time job, you have to do a full-time job in the studio after that full-time job. It's all about number of hours, not years. It's hours behind the wheel compared to how many years have you been doing this? Oh, I've been doing it 9 years, but it's all about how many hours a year are you putting into that? Because it's not some magic combination of numbers and time that make you a good potter. It is legit the hours and the experience you have behind that wheel or hand building or mold making, whatever outlet it is that you're doing to create that clay.
That's totally true. I think that goes back to what we were saying before of, like, making the decisions that make sense for your life and the work that you want to make. That goes as far as choosing where you're going to live, right? Like we would be in a radically different position if we were still even just in Chicago and we only moved 90 minutes away. It's not as cheap as Kansas, but it's not as expensive as Chicago either.
Right. No, going along that too is, do you know Jesse Woodworth, Riverwood Pottery? He makes like hammer handles, etc. I'm not going to say best friend, that'll go to his head a little bit. He's a good friend of mine, probably in that category, but we talk on the phone literally probably every day because we both have a retail shop. We both have different lines that we work. I mean, we line up very good, but we're buddies and we talk on the phone as we're throwing all day, every day, literally about nothing half the time. But he always gives me so much crap. He says, the only reason you're successful is because there's literally nothing else to do in Kansas, which he's not wrong at the same time. Like, he's out in Goshen, which is Potteryville, USA, and any given day, there's 48 different activities you could be doing. Where in South Central Kansas, when we do our open house, it's literally the only real activity worth going to within 50 miles. So, I mean, it does come where you live is a real big part of how you find your success. These events work for us, but if we were doing these events out of our garage in Chicago or Milwaukee or even Goshen,
You
Indiana,
wouldn't have a garage.
yeah, we wouldn't have the space we have because we're not millionaires. And we wouldn't be able, like, I've even talked to Andrew about it. He does an open house and he'll put
Mhm.
flyers up, or even Ryan Durbin out in basically Cincinnati area. You can put flyers up and stuff. It doesn't mean people are coming. It's hard to get city people to come because there's so much going on. They don't
Yep.
necessarily know you. And where we live, yeah, there's really not much going on. So when someone's like, a pottery sale, that sounds cool. A pumpkin patch for adults, that's pretty sweet. And it has caught on. So find your people where you live and find a way to make them buy your pots. That's the moral of the story.
Yep. That's the bow right there. I'm not even going to keep going because otherwise I just need to be on your call list at, whatever time slot in the morning is available after the call with Andrew and after the call with Jesse. And,
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Isaac. Where do you want to send people on the internet if they do buy pots on the internet? See what you guys are up to.
Kind of all over. I don't know. It's our Instagram is Isaac Shue ISR. Our Facebook is Isaac Shue ISR. Our website's gallerymostasa.com. It's not real good marketing to have all the different names all over, but it's what works for us. The web page is like our checkout. It's where we send people to just physically buy. So, and it's not always uploaded. It's after our events, and that's pretty much it. But if you're ever in Kansas, look us up. Come down, fly over, parachute out. Not many people have Kansas as a destination.
I think do you count yourself as the Midwest? Are you guys in with us? You're still the Midwest, are you?
Don't get me started on the Midwest.
Uh-oh. I just created drama.
The Midwest, and we're east of the Mississippi. Indiana is so full of themselves. We're the Midwest. You are freaking east. Like, come on.
All right.
No, we are central. We're Central Plains. Midwest would be like Utah.
Truth. Or at least Nebraska.
Yeah. We are Central Plains states. Yeah, exactly. No, I am not Midwest. I'm not Iowa. I'm not Indiana. Those people don't know geography.
I like how you just went Iowa and Indiana and completely skipped over Illinois.
It's the I states, literally the I states. We had a group in college that we called the I states because it was Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, and they all love their states so stinking much, and they love their corn, and they are the Midwest. And it's like, you are not the Midwest. But whatever. That went way off the rails, but
I love it. I enjoy it so much. And I was about to say something that would probably get me in hot water with a lot of potters in Indiana and Ohio.
just say it.
So we should probably just stop. We should probably stop. I have a personal opinion. You can fight me on it. It's fine. You're welcome to prove me wrong. But if you're in the Eastern time zone, you're not in the
You're
Midwest.
not the Midwest. That's what I'm talking about. That's a great way to put it. You are not the Midwest if you're on Eastern. Exactly.
Central time zone. Central time zone, central, middle. These are synonyms? Yeah, synonyms.
I don't get how this entire country has West in it. Like, you have the West Coast, the Pacific Northwest, the Midwest. It's like, where is the East?
The Southwest.
Yeah, the Southwest. Like, everybody wants to be something West. And then you got the East Coast. It's like,
Yep, that's it.
and if you're like your husband, my wife, trying to figure all this out as foreigners, it's like, yeah, we don't even understand it. How are you going to understand it?
I did tell him he was really lucky that he met a girl from the Midwest, because can you imagine being like landing in the East Coast and then you've got like a Boston accent, a Jersey accent, a New York accent?
No kidding.
Forget it.
We are the only people without accents. That's the good part.
Precisely. It's why so many news anchors are Midwesterners.
That's right.
Fun fact for everyone.
Exactly.
Really important information at the end of this episode.
Exactly. If they got this far, they had nothing else to do.
Oh my gosh, I love it. That's amazing. You know, having our random Midwest rant at the end of this episode does mean it's going to be really easy for me to find out who does actually listen all the way to the end of any given episode. In fact, it's actually given me a bit of a fun, let's call it Easter egg hunt type idea to learn more from all of you about what you actually want more of from this podcast. Something like what your ideal length of an episode might be. So, before we got sidetracked with the very important debate of time zones and what is or is not the Midwest, not geographically speaking, clearly, Isaac had mentioned markets. And I've got a new overheard and a market story for you coming to us from Indiana. Which reminds me, when I told you about our new fan mail ability to text the show at the end of episode 606, I forgot to mention that I'm going to have no idea who sends me a message unless you put your name in that message. Now, that can be intentional. If you want to share a funny story but stay anonymous, don't worry about it. I won't know. I will only know the general city based upon your zip code of where you're from. But if you would love a shout out, then feel free to add your name. So, this overheard at a market story comes to us from Savannah. The person, not the city, just for the record. Savannah writes, "On the bottom of all my pieces, I sign my name and the year. A man comes into my booth, turns over a few pieces and says, 'Is 24 your age?' I explain, 'No, it's just the year that we're in.' He then asks, 'Well, how old are you then?' Oh, Savannah, I have so many follow-up questions for you, but honestly, something tells me us ladies are going to have a lot more overheard at a market stories than the gents out there. Yes, maybe I'm stereotyping, but I guess y'all are just going to have to prove me wrong. Text us your own crazy market stories by clicking the Text Us link right at the top of the show notes, and I'll include them randomly, just to figure out who's listening all the way through the episodes at the end of an upcoming episode. Of course, standard messaging rates may apply. Now, in the meantime, go get back to making your dreams a reality, because together, we've got this. Today's episode is brought to you by the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art. The collection exists as an online source for research and inspiration, featuring photos of objects made by over 1,000 artists. The images are high quality and can be used with no permission required, making them a great source for students and teachers. To find out more, visit www.rosenfieldcollection.com. A special thank you to the Archie Bray Foundation for sponsoring this episode of The Maker's Playbook. The Bray Clay business is your best source for Bray Epoxy, a 2-part moldable epoxy intended for post-firing repairs. Working like clay, it's easy to shape, texture, fill gaps, and recreate missing parts. Bray Epoxy is sold in tan, white, and black base colors, with a 9-color kit that will allow you to perfectly disguise your repair. Order anytime online at archiebrayclay.com. Audio post-production of this podcast is made possible by help from Christy Kotzfan, with promotional material assistance from Queenie Maliki. The Maker's Playbook podcast is recorded on the original homelands of the Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee people. We're the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present. Until next time, my friends, go get back to making your dreams a reality. Because together, we've got this. Audio post-production of this podcast is made possible by help from Christy Kotzfan, with promotional material assistance from Queenie Maliki. The Maker's Playbook podcast is recorded on the original homelands of the Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee people. We're the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present. Until next time, my friends, go get back to making your dreams a reality. Because together, we've got this.